Miss your old familiar friends, but waiting just around the bend. Everywhere you look, there's a heart, there's a heart.
The champ, but you talk about wanting to unify, wanting to fight all the champs and things like that. Just wanted your thoughts on the WBC and their franchise champ and the franchise belt and things like that.
I don't agree with it. I don't mess with no franchise belt. I don't mess with no WBA regular belt, no super belt. It's only one champion in the weight, and that's it. Ain't no franchise, no silver, no none of that. I only go by the actual champion.
Thanks, bro.
That is Terrence Crawford expressing a very similar sentiment to the fans, to what the fans have been saying in regards to the WBC's recent string of quote-unquote franchise champions. Champions that apparently don't have mandatories, are not obligated to satisfy them, and champions who apparently can lose a professional contest but remain champions.
What?
I mean, how fucking ridiculous is that? I'm telling you, this franchise shit is a bad fucking move. It's a bad move for the WBC, and they're only hurting themselves with it. This really has been a PR, public relations disaster, because most no one is on board with this move, not the fight fans and not many of the fighters themselves. I mean, even Gervonta Davis.
Even this guy.
I mean, in terms of quotes, in terms of sound bites, this guy's no Mark Twain. But even Gervonta Davis is starting to make sense when he says they need to get rid of this belt. They need to get rid of this fucking franchise belt. It creates a situation to where the WBC is making themselves the enemy of boxing, the enemy of boxers, and the enemy of boxing fans. Because all they're doing is further diluting weight classes with these bizarre designations that don't seem to serve any purpose. And right now, the immediate consequences, the immediate backlash, it hasn't reared its ugly head all the way yet. The longer the WBC continues to exhibit these business practices, the more people are going to start saying, what the fuck do we need them for? If you're a fighter, and you're looking to climb up the ranks and become a world champion with an organization, at least right now, you should know to steer clear of the WBC, because all they're going to do is play with your title shot, delay it. Hell, in some instances, you might never even get it. I mean, you don't need the WBC to become a world champion in the sport of boxing. You don't need them specifically. There are 3 other organizations to choose from. You know, not including the IBO. I mean, things have gotten so bad that the WBC is losing so much credibility so fast, they're starting to make the IBO look good. I mean, you don't see the IBO crowning any franchise champions, do you?
Thankfully, no.
The whole idea behind a governing body in the sport of boxing is to give the sport itself structure, with its rank standings and its mandates, rules that fighters have to adhere to. I mean, that is literally the function that they're supposed to service, yet time and time again, the WBC just seems to be doing the opposite of that. There is no structure. There is no particular set of guidelines, because you know what? When they want to do something, they'll just rewrite their own rules. More particular to this conversation, Terrence Crawford's comments that he doesn't recognize this whole franchise,
French fries,
silver, platinum, turquoise, sapphire, onyx,
Mayan,
area code,
interstellar,
you know,
pearl,
bust-sized champions. He doesn't recognize all these bizarre designations, and quite right, because the fans don't either, okay? Just because the WBC slaps a label on it doesn't mean
it matters
that the fans are going to agree with it, or that the fighters themselves are going to agree with it. And the WBC in many ways is shooting themselves in their own foot, because so long as they continue to garner this negative press, this might actually coax the fighters themselves, the fighters that they hope to gain sanctioning fees from. This might actually coax those fighters to go in a different direction. That, look, I'm not fucking with the WBC. I'm not climbing up their rank standings, because these guys play favoritism all the time.
In the open.
And I could participate in eliminator after eliminator after eliminator, and all they're going to do is give me some meaningless trinket.
The WBC conveyor belt at 150 foot pounds.
These business practices from the WBC may so dissuade the fighters from attempting to climb their rank standings, from attempting to be ranked by them, and those are going to be a bunch of guys that they may not get to collect sanctioning fees from. And those sanctioning fees, that's the lifeblood for these organizations. That's what they thrive on, being able to collect sanctioning fees from sanctioning these fights. Well, what happens when the fighters don't want to be sanctioned by you? What happens when the fighters say, hey, I'm not going to waste my time on you guys, okay? Because you guys are just going to do whatever the fuck you want and collect sanctioning fees from me, and then you might end up depriving me of an opportunity to become a legitimate champion. The kind of champion that actually commands the audience's respect. They're not going to respect me for being a silver champion, an intercontinental champion, and an Estella champion, and Tarim, Diamond, Pearl.
Yeesh.
I mean, seriously, you know, the fans don't, you know, you're not fooling anybody. So the fighters themselves might so decide to go a more stable route. You know, maybe they go the IBF route. They're guaranteed to get a shot with the IBF, and if they don't go with the IBF, they might so decide to go with the WBO. As strange as this might sound, the WBC's business practices are so bad, they're actually making the WBO look like a more structured organization. It's saying a lot. In that kind of a situation, what's the appropriate course of action? What is a fighter to do? Do what Canelo did. Tell them to fuck off. I'm not fighting for your fucking belt, okay? I don't want your belt. You're just looking to crash the party so you can collect sanctioning fees from my fights. So you can fuck off, and I'll just fight for the other belts. Yeah, you can do that. There's a reason that they've been kissing this guy's ass since 2016, and it's because he was going to deprive them of the lifeblood that they thrive on, the sanctioning fees. So for all these other fighters out there that aren't on board with the WBC's business practices, they're not on board with the corruption, with the favoritism, simply deprive them of the sanctioning fees they're looking for from your fights, and that will provoke the change that both the fighters and the fight fans are looking for in the WBC. That'll do it. You deprive them of the sanctioning fees, oh yeah, things will change very quickly. In other news, in regards to this weekend's big upcoming fight between Canelo Alvarez, who means to challenge the WBO's light heavyweight champion Sergey Kovalev, Canelo's trainer had this to say. He says, we'll capitalize on Kovalev's mistakes in the fight. Says they've been training 3 months, having a fantastic camp, no setbacks, no illnesses to report. They've been taking care of themselves, and they better, given what Canelo's going to have to deal with the night of the fight. And that, you know, they've got respect for Sergey Kovalev. They acknowledge that he's a formidable fighter, but he makes mistakes that they're aware of, and they mean to capitalize on those mistakes. And when they say mistakes, it almost sounds like they're referring to Sergey's technique. In the realm of technique, I don't think Sergey offers up much in terms of flaws. Technique really isn't Sergey's problem. Sergey's problem, his drawback, has less to do with his technique and more to do with his lifestyle outside of the ring. That if this guy goes in there and he's less than perfect, it really has more to do with that than his fundamentals, than his technicality, because in terms of technicality, Sergey Kovalev is a very fundamentally sound boxer. It's just that his lifestyle outside of the ring is what affects his technique. So if he goes in there and his condition isn't holding up, or he's gassing out, his punch resistance doesn't seem the best, he can't really take it to the midsection. If these things are happening, they're not as a result of a technical deficiency so much as a lifestyle flaw. However, I will say that the pendulum swings both ways. This is going to be the heaviest Canelo Alvarez has ever fought as a professional boxer. You wonder that carrying around that much weight won't slow him down just a second, or a half a second, or a millisecond. Because Canelo Alvarez, he's known for his quick counters. He's known for staying off the center by fighting on a swivel, angling his upper body away from shots, and positioning himself to fire counter shots. This is what he's known for. But is he going to be able to do that at the same rate with the same success that he normally has as a light heavyweight? This is the most weight he's ever had to carry into a professional boxing match. How does he carry it? Does he carry it well? Will he be stronger as a result of not having to cut all those pounds? We really don't know. These are intangibles. These are things to think about. You know that Canelo Alvarez, he's a good fighter. I mean, you may not like certain elements of his career.
I don't.
But is he a good fighter? Yes, he's a good fighter. However, in spite of being a good fighter, you'll notice that, you know, I mean, he didn't hurt Gennady Golovkin, did he?
No.
He didn't hurt him in either fight. In the first fight?
No.
In the second fight?
No.
He didn't hurt Gennady Golovkin. And you look at the Jacobs fight. Fantastic fight. I mean, I think Canelo won that one clearly. But, he didn't really hurt Daniel Jacobs, did he? He didn't drop him. He didn't stop him. I mean, essentially what I'm getting at is that Canelo Alvarez really isn't that big a puncher in the middleweight division. He's not a concussive KO guy in the middleweight division, a division he's more suited to campaign in. Whereas now you're going up to light heavyweight against a bigger guy with a bigger punch than any other guy you ever fought, and you're not really that big a puncher yourself. I mean, you're not the biggest puncher in the middleweight division, so what's that say about your odds of getting a knockout in the light heavyweight division? These are things to think about. This is the reason I say it's not a foregone conclusion that Canelo wins. I know a lot of people are leaning in that direction, rightfully so. I mean, it does make sense. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying that don't convince yourself that there are no risks involved. Canelo is taking a sizable risk fighting Sergey Kovalev. Because for all Canelo's virtues, he's not that big a puncher in his own weight class. So what's he gonna be as a light heavyweight? That's the question. That's the variable. We won't know until the night of the fight. Comes to Sergey, a lot of people, they're arriving at a very similar conclusion that because Sergey can't take it to the body, that Canelo's likely to go there, and he will have success there. But I pose the same question to you now that I posed to you a couple of videos ago. That yes, it's likely that Canelo's going to be looking to go to Sergey's midsection, but he's going to have to get past Sergey's jab to do it. And Sergey really does have one of the finer jabs, not just in the light heavyweight division, but in the sport of boxing. It's a quality left hand that really allows him to control the distance, the range, the pace of the fight, and the man opposite the ring of him. I mean, if he beat Anthony Yard in his last fight, it really was on the wings of the jab, not a big straight right hand, not a big left hook. No, if he beat the guy the way that he did, it was as a result of a quality jab. And that jab is what Canelo Alvarez is going to have to work to get around, just to get within proximity of Sergey to land those body shots. And Sergey knows how to move around the ring. He's got some good footwork. He knows how to
maneuver,
use it to his advantage against a smaller target who's got to work his way in to land the kind of punches that he wants to land. Sergey being the taller fighter with more reach, more height, moving around that ring. It may be a trial for Canelo to get to Sergey's midsection. And what I'm talking about here is what I've been telling you all along. It's not a foregone conclusion that Canelo simply goes in there and mops the floor with him, or even knocks him out. It might not happen that way. The fight might go to the cards. Maybe it does.
Maybe.
I'm entertaining the possibility that maybe this is an arduous task for Canelo Alvarez, because people are treating this thing like Sergey's gonna drop from the first body shot that Canelo lands. I don't look at it that way. So when I see Eddie Reynoso talking about capitalizing on mistakes that Sergey Kovalev makes, I think to myself that, well, most of the mistakes that he makes, if any, have more to do with his physical condition, his age, whether or not he's taking care of himself outside of the ring. That's really what those mistakes are, that's as a result of what's happening outside of the ring. But if Sergey ever needed an incentive to take better care of himself, if Sergey ever needed an incentive to kick things into high gear, more so than he ever has in the past, well, this Canelo fight would do it. Thus, you might see a Sergey Kovalev who maybe he does take a better shot to the body this time than he has in previous instances. You might see a Sergey Kovalev who isn't fading as much as people are accustomed to seeing him fading. Essentially, I'm saying leave room for the unexpected in your prediction, in your demeanor towards this fight. I know a lot of people want to convince you that Sergey Kovalev is some kind of a cherry, but that's just not what he is, man. I mean, in all honesty, and I'm a huge critic of Canelo Alvarez, but I can wholeheartedly say that there are some sizable risks involved with this fight. Now, among this weekend's fights, one that's flying largely below the radar, given who's fighting this weekend, Canelo and Kovalev, but one fight that's flying a bit below the radar is the Miguel Berchelt versus Jason Sosa fight. I'll say that I had aspirations of seeing Miguel Berchelt unify his title against Jamel Herring, the WBO champion, but Miguel, he's more interested, or was more interested, in facing Sosa. And thereafter, if he is successful this weekend in defense of his WBC title, he plans to defend it yet again against Oscar Valdez, who is just recently moving up into the 130-pound division. One must ask, if everything goes to plan for Miguel, if he's successful this weekend against Jason Sosa, and he's successful in the very near future against Oscar Valdez, if he then moves up to 135 pounds to challenge Vasyl Lomachenko for what belts he's going to be in possession of, one must ask, what becomes of the WBC title? It's going to go vacant, obviously. Obviously, Miguel Berchelt means to vacate it. But if he does, where does it land?
Yeah.
With who? On what side of the street? Tell you what, right now, if you look at the WBC's ranked standings, they've got Oscar Valdez. Bear in mind, he hasn't had a fight yet at 130, but they've got him at number 1. Okay, no problem, whatever. We've seen this more or less. We've seen this before, but they've got Oscar at number 1.
He's close.
However, Oscar being at number 1 doesn't really answer the question.
What?
That if Miguel Berchelt is successful against Jason Sosa, and he's successful thereafter against Oscar, who would the title go to? It just so happens that Jojo Diaz sits in the number 2 spot. Jojo Diaz, whose name has been tied to Tevin Farmer. Two guys that just so happen to be on the DAZN side of the street, one with Matchroom and the other with Golden Boy. It's conceivable that depending on the time frame of a Miguel Berchelt versus Oscar Valdez fight, depending on the time frame of that fight, if that fight happens early in the first quarter of next year, thereafter the title would go vacant. And what could be the fight between Tevin Farmer and Jojo Diaz could have that green belt on the line. That's one way it could break down. That's one way it could happen. Another way it could happen is, Jojo Diaz and his people, they might see that they're in position to become world champions. They're in position. And it could be in an opportunistic way, picking up a vacant title as opposed to taking a chance on a Tevin Farmer. They might decide to take their foot off the gas when it comes to that Farmer fight and wait out this Berchelt versus Valdez situation. That's yet another way it could break down. They might, decide to take up a little keep busy fight before the year is out, make some extra pocket change, keep their name out there in the conversations, but effectively take their foot off the Farmer fight because they want to wait. They might not want to take those risks given that they're kind of close to getting their hands on that green belt. It would be some months, it would, but better still, they're certainly in position. And from the look of it, if and when the title goes vacant in the very near future, it could end up being Jojo Diaz versus Tevin Farmer in what could be a unification fight for Tevin's IBF and what would then be the vacant WBC. Or it could be Jojo Diaz versus Mickey Roman. Very tough out for anybody in the 130-pound division. This is a tough guy with a great beard and a big punch. Could happen that way as well. But I guess the sigh of relief that I'm breathing is that even if Miguel Berchelt leaves the weight class and the title becomes vacant and it lands in someone's lap, it won't be the lap of a PBC fighter. A PBC fighter, which I've no doubt would hold the belt hostage in all the same ways that Gervonta Davis held the WBA hostage, in all the same ways that Leo Santa Cruz held the WBA hostage. If there's a silver lining here, it is that based on these ranked standings, it's not a PBC fighter that's in line for that belt. So we have that to reflect upon and that to consider.